Part 1. Since its dawn, humanity has always reached out for something more. Something that is outside of its grasp. Something alien. And so, since the first seed was planted, the first shelter was built, since the first ashes were caught, and the first wars waged, humanity learned, developed, and adapted. Great philosophers, thinkers, and people who lived in civilizations that took hundreds of years to build were the first ones to think about the truth. They looked up to the skies and started asking themselves, what is up there? So the horrors of the unknown started developing, started emerging, and stories of great divine beings and their servants were born. Tales of great warriors defeating evil, destroying the enemies and giving life and peace to mere men were proof of one true saga, the saga of fear. For fear and terror, those two horrid feelings that were embedded in us, are the driving force of our own will to conquer anything bestowed upon us. And so, with fear and terror driving us so far into development, we have run out of space. Humanity has truly used all that was given to it, and now the time for a change has come. Humanity shall not take any more, shall not ask and beg for mere gifts, charity, and aims, but it shall take what it wants. It shall win what it always should have had, should have owned it. And so, as civilized man grew and expanded, the need for conquering outer space was becoming bigger and bigger. Thus, a small team and an operation were to be founded. It consisted of 6 members, each one with a skill set that could be used in any given moment and situation. Experienced warriors, mathematicians, scientists, and all in all, extraordinary, elite specimens of humanity. This team, a group that shall challenge the course of human history, was named Omega OEC, standing for Outer Expedition Crew. Omega was founded by Beric Fellingson, a military general well decorated, alongside Marjorie and Joey Gray, a married pair known for their contribution in the fields of physics, biology, and genetics. A few years before the creation of the Omega OEC, the pair was controversial for its infamous human testing that was never proven as a factum. On the other hand, their partner whom they had known for years, Beric Fellingson, was never a liked public figure due to his ruthlessness and brutality. In the beginning, the Omega OEC was to be filled with hundreds of qualified and educated members. Yet, as the importance of its crew grew to be global level, it was to be filled with only a few qualified and educated members. A choice that shall be regretted in the near future. Part 2. The decision was made. The Omega crew was to be made up of only a few capable people and equipped with a highly advanced rocket system that did not take much to be worked with. The crew leader was appointed by Beric Fellingson himself. He named Jason Bellstone, his trustworthy special ops colleague, who is yet 20 years younger than him, as the Omega crew leader. Jason Bellstone was born into a low-class family and worked his way up to anything throughout his life. He is remarkably intelligent, strong, and experienced. But what came in the days of his stay on the planet Mars was something no one could prepare him and his crew for. The Omega OEC arrived on Mars on August the 9th. They had been traveling for quite some time, and the arrival was satisfactory. The crew consisted of Jason Bellstone, physicist and ex-military, Daryl Ontegro, biologist and zoologist, Marina Williams, Dr. Harold Limes, ex-Navy SEAL, Nurse Ashley Light, and one of the most important physicists and scientists ever alive, Harvey Johnson. These were the 6 unfortunate members of the crew that shall mark a scar on humanity for its entire existence. if it gets any further. The field was ready to be researched, and in future years developed. The official task assigned to the crew was researching and inputting in the database anything found on planet Mars. This mission was to be completed in 160 days. The goal is to make sure that the planet is habitable for human beings, safe and completely free of any toxic substances, dangerous diseases, and unknown, hostile life. Part 3. The surface was orange. The soil was dim, hard to decipher its true form. The sky is dark, and the weather is freezingly cold, without the suits the crew was provided with. The weather was the first unfriendly, unwelcoming, and forbidding factor that demoralized the crew. It was the numbing, piercing frost that could be felt even with the suits on, for it was not the unusual coldness that one may feel on Earth, but a coldness you could see, and without even feeling it, a coldness so sharp and bitter that you would know it's there. The crew hated it, but one thing they started hating more during their first hours out of the base was the blunt silence, the deafening tranquility. So peaceful and calm at first glance, became eerie and horrid after only a few hours. It was rather manageable during the day, as the entire crew spoke with one another during their first walk around the rocket and the base, their first check-in. But the night was when things got horribly out of control. For after hours of silent nature, our own brains make up sounds, just so we may stay sane. Thus we shall hear as our blood travels throughout our veins in our ears. We can hear our bassy heartbeats going. And it would eventually make us lose our minds. Completely. This is a fact known by each member of the group. Yet knowing how a poison works does not mean we are immune to it. And so when the sound started, no one could truly tell if what they were hearing was something that lurks out there in the shadows, or if it's their body giving in. The first night was strange and uncanny, but the pure tiredness surpassed the feelings of fear at a certain point, for their bodies went limp. Part 4. It was the next day when the true research had begun. Marina Williams was the most excited out of the entire crew. She is well known for her contribution to the biology world, which is a field so vast that many do not ever grasp hold of its entirety. Yet this highly intelligent woman is one of the most revolutionary biologists to live. She was always fascinated in the unknown, and with what lives beyond the Earth's orbit. So, they stepped one after the other on the soil. Daryl Ontegro was the second one in line. He is tasked with security, alongside Ashley Light. Yet the two possess serious knowledge in the fields of medicine and physics. Better knowledge than the majority of the world, that is. Harold Limes is a genius doctor that was just in front of their crew leader, Jason, alongside Harvey Johnson, who could not stop talking about his personal attachment to the task he was assigned with. The truth is that Jason was the Omega OEC leader, yet Harvey Johnson was the one assigned with controlling everything that gets discovered and inputting its information into the database. If the Omega crew was to fail during an unfortunate event, Harvey is the one that should be saved. At least that is what was ordered before the initial launch. The crew was exploring the territory for a few hours. It did not seem as much. Soil samples, air dexterity, and textures were taken. Humidity and temperature were tested in different locations, and the results were all as expected. Nothing stood out, and Mars seemed boring as they thought it would be. For no member of the crew really expected anything grand or out of the ordinary. They are, after all, a security test, and thus they returned to the base that night. Mars had a different effect on their bodies, which seemed more worn out, but it did not cause them any additional worries. It was time for a rest, again. The night seemed normal as everyone lay in their separate rooms. They felt as if they had already gotten used to the strange silence that was in the air, even when they were talking. For if there was something there, No one of the 6 could explain it. Something that made them tired, uneasy, and uncomfortable. It could not be touched, but it was there. Perhaps it was the change of scenery, or the change of a planet, something that no one endured before them. But it was something. Harold was the first one to experience that something when it woke him up. Colors and shapes started to appear in front of him, as if a dream wanted to form. But no, in that silent, blunt, and entirely black room, something was wrong. The weird layout of the room did not make it any better. He turned his head around as he started to sweat, trying to see where the strange noise was coming from, for there was something that made it. It was a dull noise you could smell better than you could hear it, but it certainly was a noise. It appeared in such silence, so Harold could feel his eardrums getting tenser and tenser, to the point of him hearing a quiet heartbeat within him. And then, out of the darkness, something loud rapidly passed by on the outside. He knew that it was there. He knew something was outside. Thus, he turned on his lamp and stood out of his bed. The rooms they slept in were highly isolated and protected from the outside, thus having no windows. They knew they are not supposed to leave them at night, for everyone is sleeping. Yet Dr. Harold seemed to forget that. And so, he left his room into the dark abyss-like hallway. Long and unwelcoming. It felt strange and alien. But there was still something out there. As he stepped out of his room, he could see a glimpse of light coming through the window, on his left side. He walked towards it, quietly. And with each step, it was closer. The closer he got, the more fear crept in. And the more he realized the danger of the situation he put himself into. Yet, there was something there, lurking behind that thick panel of glass. Yet, he had to see it, examine it. As he stepped towards it, he could clearly see it. Out there, in the never-ending desert-like mist of the red planet, now embraced by the tint of darkness, stood a thing. Something. Unexplainable to the doctor. A man who had seen what generations have not. Yet unexplainable. A pair of dot-like eyes, yellow and creepy, horrifyingly organized to a glob, into a cloud of evil. A staring thing, out there, yet so far away, yet so close. Part 5. The morning came, and the ones that lurked where they should not had forgotten almost everything. The reality of his encounter was totally erased from the memory of Dr. Harold Limes, yet he knew, for it was somewhere in the back of his head, that something had happened. He chooses not to talk about it, and so the Omega crew started their first proper workday. It was in the very first hours that they had trekked over much lands. Once again, they did not expect much, other than the scenery they were already getting used to. The one person that sunk in his thoughts was Harold, who was slowly letting himself go into the lie that what happened last night was just a bad, strange dream. Something stopped their boredom, though. Harvey Johnson, who was in the middle of the crew lineup, invented a supersonic scanner 10 years prior to the expedition he is a part of now. The same instrument, just upgraded, was with him on this very expedition, and in a fragment of a second, it picked up a signal. The sharp, loud beep glazed everyone's eardrums. There was something there, and the only place it would be was underground. Something they have exactly been searching for. Jason and Daryl started digging immediately. The entire crew set up for their tasks in case something was found underground. It did not take much to hit a hard structure, buried just about a few inches below the surface. The hard, grainy rock hid from sight. What they found on that day changed their lives in ways no one could have predicted. They took the rugged fossil into their base. It weighed about 10 pounds and was cube-like, 1 meter in diameter on all sides. It seemed like it was engraved with undecipherable inscriptions, symbols hardly understandable even to the best linguists. One thing was certain. This was a strange object that should immediately be shipped to Earth for further examination. Yet Harvey took much interest in it, and as they observed it with him, slowly but surely, yellow dots started to appear. They glowed stronger and stronger as each minute passed by, and as they started to gain fluorescent strength, the entire crew, except Harvey, whose amazement grew, until it was interrupted. Marina, Daryl, and Ashley all agreed upon the decision to quarantine this new discovery, for it definitely was not a dead fossil as they had first thought. Harold did not say anything as he stood there, watching and glaring in absolute awe. A few moments later, Jason agreed with them. And so, with 4 votes against 1, the fossil was to be quarantined in a special, disclosed area of the base, and was not to be touched or researched until further notice. Little did they know, the time for that kind of a decision had passed far earlier. After having dinner, the crew laid to rest. The nights kept getting more similar to the ones back on Earth, thus making the entire Omega crew more relaxed and carefree. A few hours into his sleep, this time Jason himself was awakened. But what woke Jason up were no walking and trekking sounds. What woke him up was something never heard before by the human species. For Dr. Harold's visions of the night before may be explainable by mere logic and simple reasoning. Yet, the voices, so dull and empty, yet with a tone to them, quite remarkably unexplainable. They spoke in something that could only be interpreted as a dialect, but in an alien tongue. Something unusual and never heard before. Jason heard this all the way from his bed, and in those few moments of deciding if it's real or fake, he stood up, turned on the lights, and made his choice. There was something out there. His steps were too light for a person of his build. He took them slow and steady, leaning his head in the direction from which the sound had been coming. He slowly opened the thick safety door of his room, which was conveniently smooth and silent. The sound could be heard twice as loud at this stage, and he was certain that something was making those unorthodox noises. They sounded like cat calls. They hissed and spewed around, but in such an organized manner, in such a tone, and with a balance of that which we associate with animals, and that which we find human-like. And so, he kept going onwards, getting closer to the source of the sound with each step. Fear slowly bewildered his instincts that were hardened by more than a few life or death situations. He was a machine, ready to react. But something about this very position he found himself in made those instincts mellow down, and Jason was perfectly aware of this, which was the true problem. The night was only getting darker, and the humidity seemed to have risen. Balls of sweat started to appear on Jason Bellstone's forehead, and his breathing got heavier and heavier. His eardrums felt burned out, and started producing a high-pitched noise within his head. The sense of uncertainty grew more and more as his mind remembered that he was not at home, but somewhere else. Those unfamiliar noises seemed more aggressive with each step he took, and what eventually stopped them was a human scream. Part 6. He ran up to the room where he thought the scream took place. It was the quarantine room, where the fossil that was found earlier that day was placed. Once he found himself in front of the thick, triple-layer glass of the quarantine room, all that he could see was a pond of rich, shiny, red blood on the table. It stood there, still expanding its limits, under the blinking, dim, white light that was clearly damaged as well. There was nothing else to see, except the tarnished operation room. There was no fossil, and there was no whoever's blood that was. Jason just stood there, as fear crept up into his veins. He stood there in the darkness, all alone, feeling the humid coldness of the air kiss his skin. The long, empty black hallway on both of his sides could hide anything and everything, including whatever did this. His senses are lost, and his mind is going in places which it had not been for years. But as he collected himself, and as nothing horrible had happened to him yet, he raised an alarm. In a matter of minutes, the Omega crew got together. The lights were on, the air filter was turned on, and the senseless feeling of loneliness and danger was dead. But something else emerged. The overwhelming chaos took some time to itself before everyone realized what had truly happened. The blood on the table that lay just a glass panel away from them indicated that someone was hurt. But it was only after a few panic-induced sentences that they realized Marina Williams was missing. And the fact was proven to be true after a detailed search of the base was done. Before they knew it, morning dawn had come, and the time for Grant decisions was there. Not only was the crew angry, but that poisonous feeling was aimed especially towards Harvey Johnson for specifically wanting to keep the fossil. Jason kept his thoughts to himself, but as everyone slowly sewed together a plan, he spontaneously agreed. To his demise, Harvey Johnson, who they blamed for the incident, was placed on the front line of danger. The plan was as follows. Harvey is to exit the base and do a simple inspection around it to examine if everything is as it should be. He shall search the base and the ship for contamination, and after which he shall return and the Omega crew will immediately go back to Earth, without Marina, who is now presumed dead. This entire mission will be watched by the crew back in the Overlook room. Jason agreed to this without any hesitation. This plan placed another member's life in danger, but the search of the base had to be done. It was better to put one person in danger than all of them. Plans like this were supposed to be direct back to Earth. But the main problem was the signal disruption the base had been getting all night, and the second problem was that the crew in charge on Earth would never agree to said plan. After all the preparations, Harvey was ready to step out, in his thick, protected spacesuit. He waited for the giant doors to open. This time, he was all alone. A gust of wind stumbled onto the white surface of the floor as the doors opened and exposed the entire base to the vast outside. That could, at this point, hide anything in its gaping jaws. The red planet came into his view, an auburn haze that ignited his sense of recklessness, death-driven fear. He stepped out, and the soil jumped in the air due to his weight pressing down on it. The heavy door behind him slowly but loudly closed, and the steel scream they made let Harvey know the time for turning around was over. All there was now was him and this endless orange desert that certainly hid things unexplainable to mere men. His steps were slow at first. He did not know where to go. It was purebred fear that fueled his every breath as he just turned his head around, waiting for something to be beside him. For the thick spacesuit covered much of his corner view, limiting his sight to what was only in front of him. He decided to turn to the left side of the ship and make a lookout there first. He walked slowly, as quietly as possible, but the breath that came out of his air filters was too loud, deafening anything that would try to sneak up on him. He slowly bobbed his way to the shiny base wall, with the orange rocks cracking beneath his feet. The shadows of the dim light seemed so full and vibrant at once, as he was all alone out there. The vast space, peaceful yet unpredictable, could hide so much good and so much evil. His senses rose, alerted and disturbed. The goal of his task at a point became just something to walk towards, and nothing else. He finally came to the curving point of the base, when he saw it. A thing he could never resist. Yet if someone had told him about it, he would strongly advise resisting it. It was a hole that went deep into the ground, but was dug magnificently. So intriguing that he did not know if it was beautiful or horrifying. It was dug in a mathematical order, geometrically, so impossible. Twists and ends where they should not be, peaks and sharp edges on soft and dull surfaces, and it all, slowly, like a nightmarish staircase, ascended into the depths. In complete awe and complete captivation, Harvey went down there, slow and steady, without a blink of his eye, even when the salty sweat drop touched his eyes. His breathing was heavy and uncontrolled, his heartbeat fast and unsafe. Yet none of this mattered, for he is coming down, and he can feel it. He can feel something so strange and alien to him, something that attracts him and fuels his body with unusual energy. Crystals of blue color lit up on the walls of the tunnel he was going through. They looked menacing and exotic, poisonous in a way. But there was an opening he could see, as that was the only radical thinking done at that point. The only thing he surely knew was that it is coming. Something big is coming at the end of this tunnel. A large beast swarming with cloudy shapes. Its body unimaginable, sharp yet dim, so strong and malevolent, something no mere man could ever resist. Darkness surrounded him from all sides, something behind him, and something in front of him. And whatever it was not human. It was not supposed to be there. The last thing Harvey Johnson saw was a bright light. Part 7. After some hours had passed by, what was left of the Omega OEC presumed Harvey Johnson dead. Truth be told, they were not too sad about his death, as fear was what they were most afraid of. And so, Jason Bellstone, Daryl Ontegro, Harold Limes, and Ashley Light were the only ones left out of the human race on planet Mars. The final order made by Jason Bellstone was the departure of the main ship, for which the initial preparations will have to be made, and will take a few hours. The crew agreed not to separate themselves anymore, but speed is vital. They knew there was something seriously dangerous out there, so their nerves were weak and thin. It was a ticking clock of pending doom that made each second more horrifying. As they got closer to the actual escape, the chances of a disaster grew larger and larger, as something was bound to happen. And so it did, at the worst time, in the worst possible place. The base hub. The hub was a place where all the generators were, and thus where all the power that fueled the system came from. Before the launch of the spaceship itself, it was obligatory to turn off the generators due to the possibility of overheating. The entire crew agreed to do the task together. The room was beautifully lit up. The ceiling had long, bright white lights all across, and the giant, high-quality generators were lit up to the point of every single light. Everyone was together, and the huge size of the room made them feel safe and strong. But some things are not what they always seem. The full sense of security loosened them up, and so each of them took a generator, It did not take long for things to go south. In a fragment of a second, in that one historic moment that changed the path humanity will head, the lights turned off. And just like that, the open space that once granted security could now be the source of anything. Just like that, what once was a group is now spaced together, meters apart. Suddenly, the thing that had already taken two of them appeared in their midst. Jason could hear Harold Lyme screaming in pain and agony, so loud and sharp as he could also hear his body slowly cracking and die off until there was nothing left but echoes. Echoes were the only living thing about his body, which was already dead by now. The group then went silent, as each of the live members wanted to survive, making the situation even more isolated for them. It was pitch black, and even though they were in the same room, each of them was in their own terror-filled world. Ashley Light was scared to death, standing still and sweating. The only thing that visibly moved on her was her hair, which was pointing directly up. She tried as hard as possible not to make a move. Daryl Ontegro prayed, for it was not that he was a great believer, but it was the fact that he had reasoned with his upcoming death. And Jason? He slowly, as quiet as possible, started walking towards the escape door, which was, as he remembers, only a few meters away. They could hear it. Other than their heartbeats, the thing amongst them. The giant terror-infusing evil, while it moved its body throughout the room. And Jason, with every step, risked it being behind him. Yet this was a risk worth taking in his mind. Step by step, he was closer and closer, and his breathing got heavier and heavier as adrenaline started rushing and fueling his body and his brain. And then, a man screamed. A man no other than Daryl. It was a short-lived, loud, and painful scream. One of those screams that gives a sore throat. Jason escaped the room, followed by Ashley. They were now running together, throughout the darkness of the base, disoriented and fearful for their lives. In absolute agony and fear, they heard how the alien sounds, as if it was chasing them like prey. Them and their little bodies, hunting them in a manner like it is a sport. Yet they, as some rodents, were fighting for their lives. They finally reached the narrow staircase that led to the spaceship, and as they jumped stairs and ran up to it as fast as they could, the beast got stuck in the narrow passage, and finally stopped. Perhaps it took another way out, or it just left for no reason. But they never heard from it again. All that could be heard in their cabin, other than the powerful engines and the system turning on, were their weeps. Warrior tears and sweat had fallen that day, and Mars was to be visited by yet some other crew that will know what awaits them this time. Until then, what was left of the Omega OEC stays on Earth, where they belonged, where their home is. Hi sci-fi horror fans, it's Kira Words. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the story, make sure to give it a thumbs up and leave a comment. And remember, stay cosmic.